Hello and welcome to the 13th episode of Born in Quarantine. This one is going to be yet another two-parter, so stay tuned for part 2. There is no way around it. You're either going to really like this episode or the subject matter will not matter to you. So, today we are going to talk about Iranian cinema. You may have noticed there is no Batman mark. It's because I've made what is the only constant in almost all of the movies I'm going to talk about, tea. I'm going to be honest, I don't like tea. And as an Isfahani / Azeri man, it's like committing heresy. It's blasphemous to say you don't like tea. And to make matters even worse, this is not even something, I let seep and steep. This is tea bag. So if you don't see me anymore, know that tea aficionados have killed me. As I've mentioned before, I was born, I was raised, and I live in Iran. And as much as I want to think internationally, I am bound by this geographical force to be here. And my first instances of witnessing cinema and my first relations with cinema was in fact Iranian movies. Actually, the first movie I have a memory of watching was I know what you're thinking, and to be honest, no. If I tell you the context, it's not even gonna make this scene any less weird. So whether we like it or not, we are part of Iranian cinema. But what is Iranian cinema? That's the biggest question. To put it simply, Iranian cinema is an anomaly. It shouldn't exist. It's a proxy of an industry instead of an actual industry. It lives inside of this bubble that is seemingly indestructible simply because outside forces have no voice in it. International movies do not get premiered here, so you either go and watch an Iranian movie on cinema or wait for cinematheques to put the international movies on their cinemas, or you just don't go to the cinema. So it has created this shell, this empty shell that represents a cinema but is in fact a proxy. Cinema came to Iran at a very early age. Iran was probably third or fourth country that got a video camera, the film camera, sorry. It's because our king at the time, Muzaffar ad-Din Shah Qajar, bought one. Not because we developed one, we bought one. And so Iran has been in the top of the history, but Iranian cinema took a long time to get moving. And even then was faced with harsh criticism. You have to realize many of the performing arts, including singing, theater, dancing, all of them were sort of frowned upon by the Iranian culture. One would argue even now. Actually, there is a sad story. The first Iranian talkie was a movie by the name of The Girl from Lorestan, دختر لور. And the main actress in that movie was faced with so much backlash from the society at the time for appearing in that movie. She basically appeared in that movie and signed her sentence to be a social outcast, which is inhumane and savage, even by standards of that timeline. So there has been this distance between cinema and average public in Iran. And it hasn't been healed very much. It also doesn't help that Iranian cinema, throughout all of its history, and as I say, it's a long history, even though it's not very fruitful, it's a long history, it never managed to develop genre. Having a genre is very crucial to have an audience. People may not look at it that way nowadays, but if you don't have a genre, you do not have a loyal audience, because a loyal audience usually goes and watches a certain genre. For example, I am a Western fan, so when a movie comes out, one of the factors that if I may watch it or not is the fact that it's Western. If it's Western, I have a higher tendency to watch it. Iranian cinema never had that. In early days, before the revolution in 1970s, there was sort of a semi-genre which was film Farsi, and even that was too broad. You could have movies as stupid as Juja Fokoli, which would translate to Dandy Man, to something as good as Ganj Qarun, which would roughly translate it to the treasure of Qarun. I don't know what Qarun means in English. I will look it up and put it here. So with that broad, it's not really a genre, it's just a style of filmmaking. Then revolution happened, everything that happened before that sort of got away. Then in the 1980s, which would mean in Iran would be 1360s, we got a resurgence of movies, and even that would be very dependent on the director and who is on charge at the time. So Iranian cinema has highs and lows, but it's not for a certain genre, it's for the whole cinema. You know, we have a high, which was late 60s and 70s, 1960s and 1970s. Then straight down, then we have 80s, 90s were okay, not very good, but okay. And then 2000, we just hit a nosedive and we became like a handful of good movies every decade. But with all of that said, there are some very good directors in Iran, and even not in an Iranian level, because there is this misconception that if you want to talk about an Iranian movie, you should look at it through this bubble of Iranian. You know, like this movie is not a good movie when you look at it in comparison to any other international movie. But, you know, in the bubble of Iran, it's okay. So I don't really believe in that. A good movie is a good movie. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's made in Iran, if it's made in America, if it's made in Japan, if it's made in Russia, if it's made in South Africa. If it's a good movie, it's a good movie. It should not be restricted by the culture or by the location or by the geography. But there are directors that I put in high regard, even shoulder to shoulder with some of the greatest directors of cinema history. Not just Iranian cinema, just whole cinema. People like the late Abbas Kiarostami or Dariush Mehjui, early Dariush Mehjui, not nowadays. He's still alive, sadly, and is making very bad movies. Nasser Taqvai, who hasn't made a movie in a long time, sadly, they don't allow him to. Or the late Feridun Gole, which made some amazing movies before the revolution. Or Amir Naderi, another great director that has made great movies before and after the revolution. And even someone like Samuel Khachikian, which I think had the best understanding of Iranian public for whenever he made a movie. But for this episode and next episode, I like to talk about three directors. These three men are what I want to call Iranian directors. Their movies is so embedded into Iranian culture that much like you say a Fellini movie or Yasujiro Ozo movie, you do not fully understand it unless you dig a little deeper inside the culture that breeds these movies. The first one of these three is Bahram Beyzaie. Let me tell you, performing arts in Iran are forever indebted to Bahram Beyzaie. He is the man responsible for taking Iranian culture and Iranian art out of the dark ages and into the modern ages without losing its identity. He studied and wrote a great number of essays on the history of performing arts in Iran, and he took them, mixed them with more modern elements of today's world, and created this amazing harmony to let the Iranian public and the Iranian artists to use what is past and use what is used now and create something truly breathtaking without being bogged down by what came before and without trying to imitate something that is generally not Iranian. And the fact that we have a lot of today's cinema directors, writers, anything that manages to combine these two very good and create something breathtaking, it is indebted to Bahram Beyzaie. I don't think there is anyone in the history of Iranian performing arts as important as him. And he has made movies. His first movie came out in the early 70s, I think 1972, with a movie called Ragbar, roughly translated to Downpour. An amazing movie with an amazing cast of characters, and it showed something about the works of Beyzaie, both good and bad, that took him throughout all of his career. To keep things short, I want to mention just a couple of his movies. He has made a lot of good movies like Basho Gharibe Kuchak, roughly translated to Basho the Little Stranger, Musafiran, roughly translated to Travelers, and Vaqti Hame Khabim, roughly translated to When We Were All Asleep. They are amazing movies and I highly recommend you definitely give them a watch. But two movies I do want to mention, and I will highlight what is good and sadly what is bad about them. The first one is Marg Yazdgird, roughly translated to The Death of Yazdgird. For those of you who might not know, Yazdgird III was the last Persian king before the invasion of Muslims more than 1,000 years ago, more than 1,200-300 years ago. And he has this stigma in Iranian culture of being a very bad king, very undeserving king. And there is this tale, I'm not sure if it's true or not, because it's so long ago, and after the invasion of Muslims to Iran, a lot of historical texts were removed. There is not much we have from what happened back then. The most that we have are also written by Western historians, Greek historians, or Roman historians. So it is a bit unclear. But there is this tale that when Yazdgird III heard that the Arabs are coming, he ran away and was killed in a mill by the guy running the mill and his wife. Death of Yazdgird is actually about that. It is this guy, his wife, and his daughter who apparently have killed Yazdgird, the king of Iran, the king of Persia, the king of, back then, one of the biggest provinces in the whole world. And they have to answer these three officials about whether or not they have done it and how they have done it.
ما همه سرداران و سرکردگانی نژاده ایم، نه غارتیان و چپاولگران، و این دادگستری است، نه شبیخون.
Death of Yazdgird was originally a play, and when you see the movie, it is very notorious for having that recorded play feel, and actually that is the bad thing about it. As much as I love Bahram Beyzaie as a writer, and I think he is amazing as a writer, I have to admit, he is not the best director when it comes to movies. His prominent place of power is the stage. And so a lot of his movies doesn't really use camera to their advantage. They just feel like someone is filming a play. The shot composition, the overacting in some cases, which is more natural in theater than in cinema. The lighting, everything about it just feels like you're watching a play. And not in the best way possible either. But with that said, what makes Bahram Beyzaie's work Iranian?
در خواب دیدم که سوار در بیابان بیکران می روم بر باری تیز پای خود و بر زمین نه خار و علف که شمشیر تیز می روید.
Well, if you watch Death of Yazid, you will realize it is very much written and taken with having old poets and old stories and old anecdotes in mind. If you ask an average Iranian what makes Iranian culture unique, they will more than likely say the poems. Iranian literature, good or bad, has had a very long history. It is this vast sea of stories and anecdotes that have penetrated the Iranian subculture. Throughout the years, even through the invasion of Muslims, even through the many other invasions that happened throughout the history of Iran, from Afghans to Mongols, it has always been a constant. It has always gone forward. There is this claim by one of the poets in Iranian history, a man named Ferdowsi, that he single-handedly saved the Persian language. He says that in his book, Shahnameh, which is one of the most important pieces of literature for anyone wanting to study Iranian literature, he claims that all of the other provinces under the Muslim rule spoke Arabic because that was the language of Quran, which is the holy book of the Islam. But Iran and the whole area around it, they didn't. They spoke in Persian or Farsi because Ferdowsi tried his hardest to preserve that language. Whether or not it's the claim that is all him or not, but there is one thing very clear. Nobody in Egypt talks the old Egyptian language. They all talk Arabic. Nobody in Palestine or Syria, which used to be Babylon and Jerusalem, talks in their native language. They just talk in Arabic. But yet Iran, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan, they all talk in Farsi, Persian. And so the first thing Bahram Beyzaie does, he looks at what made this language pass throughout the ages and how do we use it in the modern times. The story of Death of Yazid, it's not an old story. The structure is very modern. You can even see a lot of other and more prominent Western writers' influence in it. People like Chekhov or Johann August Strindberg. But the language, the anecdotes, the way people address each other, the way people are portrayed are very much indebted to Iranian mythology and Iranian literature. It becomes more prominent in the next movie, and in my idea of the better movie, I love this movie, Sakkoshi. Roughly translated to Killing Mad Dogs. It came out in 2001, so I was born then. Killing Mad Dogs is a very weird movie. It's a neo-noir, but not really. It's the story of this woman, Golrukh Kamali, who comes back to Tehran from another city, goes to see his husband, and his husband tells him that I have like 10 checks that if you don't get people to agree not to sue me over, I will rot in jail. So she accepts that, yes, I'm going to talk to these different people and get your checks and get a written agreement that they do not sue you. That's the basic story. The first 30 minutes of the movie is very slow, though. You have to kind of drag on. But when she goes on to this quest of talking to these people and you see it happen, it just becomes very clear. These people that he is going to talk to, which, let me just say, calling Killing Mad Dogs an ensemble cast, it's the understatement of the century. Anyone who had been anyone at that time in Iranian cinema was in it, excluding the very old generation like Izzatullah Intizami and Jamshid Mashayikhi and Muhammad Ali Keshavarz, but everyone was in it. It's just mad. Even bit parts are played by prominent actors who had made a name by then in Iranian cinema and in Iranian television. It's weird, but you're working for Bahram Beyzaie, of course you're going to be there. They are not characters. They are not, typical characters either. They are archetypes, and in a very weird way. For example, Tabanpur, the guy who handles the hotel, he's like this old witch. He talks like one. He gathers information. He's kind of mousy like one. He's like one that gathers all things and has no clear master. He is spying on Golokh, but nobody knows why. Even by the end of the movie, you kind of have an idea why, but it's not clear why. These archetypes, they're all very reminiscent of old Iranian archetypes. As I said, Shahnameh is a very important piece of literature in Iran, and you can almost find parallels for most of these characters. For example, you have Haji Naqdi, this sort of larger than life guy. First of all, I love this scene. It's just seamless, and the way people all respect him. It's sort of reminiscent of a very famous king in Shahnameh, Keykavus, but with a coat of Islamic fanaticism. And he has a wife, he seemingly has a good life, but he's also a creep wanting to have relations with Golokh in exchange for the check. And let me tell you, Golokh starts as this naive woman, but throughout the movie, she becomes very jaded because of stuff that happens to her. She gets beaten, she gets raped, she gets humiliated. It's just uncomfortable to witness what this woman goes through. And even the structure is sort of like another famous Iranian story from Shahnameh, Haft-Khane Rostam, which means 7 stages that this Iranian hero Rostam needed to go through to get to king and release him from this monster Diva Safid. And it's very much like that. You go from easy to harder and harder stuff. You will go with a guy who killed himself because he had no money, so he's definitely going to accept your offer, to someone who just grabs you and hits you over and over just because of a misunderstanding. So it's structured like an old Iranian tale, but told in a very modern way. And it's a good movie. If you want to watch one movie from Bahram Beyzaie, watch The Faf Yazget, but after that, watch Killing Mad Dogs, because Killing Mad Dogs is just amazing. And there is the issue that I said. As much as I love this movie, I hate most of the camera work. I hate a lot of the editing. I don't like Mojdeh Shamsai, the main character. The rest of the cast is actually doing amazing. Mitra Hajjar is doing amazing. Majid Mozaffari is doing amazing. Hassan Poushirazi is doing amazing. Why isn't your main character doing amazing? Mainly because she's not a good actress to begin with. It's weird, and she's very, very unrealistic. Any movement she does just feels unnatural, which isn't a good thing for an actor. My throat is parched, so let me drink this devil's brew. God damn it. What if you go to the downtown where everything is kind of grimy? Most of the people can't even write their own names, let alone read about these heroism and mythical aspects of life. And most of what they do is very much influenced by not only a very long reign of religious tendencies, but the very things that the government wants them to know throughout the history. So they have developed another subculture within themselves that wants to be like the old heroes of Shahnameh, but is in fact very bogged down by whatever the government is pushing on them. Well, that is when you have Masoud Kimiaei. Masoud Kimiaei is not an antithesis, but he is sort of the other side of the coin to Bahram Beyzaie. Bahram Beyzaie was working with the highest of art, influenced by the Iranian history and Iranian mythology and Iranian literature. Masoud Kimiaei is very much influenced by normal everyday people. He is still alive, so is Bahram Beyzaie, by the way. He has a problem that I will mention in the next episode because I have to cut his section in two to keep the video short. I'm going to talk about two movies from Masoud Kimiaei too, and I will explain why. Masoud Kimiaei was one of the directors that was very influenced by Western movies. He watched a lot of movies that would be imported to Iran back then, and he got influenced by a lot of them. And remember, he was watching movies in the 60s, so like the best time to be alive and watch movies. And he got influenced by them a lot, and you can see it because his directing style is very cinematic. I don't think he's studied cinema, and I think what he's doing is basically imitating, but he is doing a great imitation. His movies are usually very well shot, very well edited, very well directed. They have a certain style which is not very common in Iran. You can definitely tell a Masoud Kimiaei production by just watching the movie, because the way the people talk and the way the movie is represented. But hands down, one of the most important movies that Masoud Kimiaei has made, created in 1969, which would mean it's the 1340s in Iranian calendar, and it's a movie by the name of Beyzaie. I can't give you a rough translation because Beyzaie is the name of a guy. Beyzaie has many important footnotes throughout the Iranian cinema. It was the first anti-hero. It was the first sort of revenge plot. It was very gritty and very outspoken for when it came out. It's a very gory movie. And it was one of the movies that jump-started the new wave in Iranian cinema, something that I will explain in the next episode. Sorry, but it's a long discussion and I need to talk about it in depth. Now, what's the story of this movie? Well, we open with a family where the daughter has committed suicide because she was raped. Then the older brother, Farmoon,
وای خدا فرمان اومد
goes to confront the guys who had raped her and they kill him. The younger brother, Beyzaie, was not in Tehran at the time. He comes back, realizes what has happened, and goes out of his way to kill these characters. So it's a basic revenge plot, sort of like Death Wish, the Charles Bronson movie, but before that. And it is very gritty. It doesn't shy away from the details. It shows every slash. The characters, they don't censor themselves. They just say what is happening. And for the time, it was a big thing. Also, because these were very normal dialogues for the time.
قیصر کجایی که داشته تا کشتن
Masoud Kimiaei does not try to appeal to the older literature. He does not use them. He uses what people are talking. It's a very great time capsule of what people talked back then. Most of these people were angry at the government, at their own families, at the injustice, at other families. And they talked in a very angry way. They were ready to just burst into this long line of just trying to make sense of it all.
تو حالا جوونی داغی از اون خون کیف میکنی اما من نه تو یه بچه‌ای
من بچم آره من خیلیم بچم واسه اینه که هر کی تو گوشم بزنه میزنم تو گوشش اما تو چی دلت میخواد تو گوشت که بزنم بگی من پهلوونم باید افتاده باشه.
They were also very protective of their image and their status. It's actually one of the most important parts of any Masoud Kimiaei movie. It's how people see themselves. And it's very much grounded in normal, everyday dialogue. Masoud Kimiaei has a way with words, somewhat poetic, but not in the same way that Bahram Beyzaie is poetic. his politics are very much embedded in normal speaking, which, as much as Iranian public wants to deny, is not the same as the literature. So watching Beyzaie, you are watching this family go through all of this turmoil and this character just being oppressed by anyone. And spoiler alert for a movie that came out in the 69, and I'm pretty sure anyone by now knows, he gets killed by the police. Not because of any censorship or anything, because that's how Masoud Kimiaei saw movies, and movies that he saw were very much influenced by the Hays Code. So it's a subconscious thing that you are censored by something that isn't affecting you. But Beyzaie is killed by the police, and it's not a happy movie. In a time where a lot of movies were trying to be more lighthearted, Beyzaie was like a punch that Iranian public really needed. Beyzaie is a vigilante. Definitely, he's a vigilante. He works outside of the law, trying to bring these men to justice, to basically street justice. And he is very violent, but not in a bad way, if you know what I mean. There isn't needless violence in Beyzaie. There is almost sort of a cathartic violence. You see Beyzaie do this because the universe of the movie is trying to convey to you there is no other way for Beyzaie. He can't go to the police and say, well, the Armangol brothers, the people who raped his sister and killed his brother, are guilty. The police wouldn't believe it. The police wouldn't care. These were lowlifes. They lived in the slums. They spent their days drinking alcohol and attacking each other. Police didn't care. He had no other way to avenge and get justice but to, well, become a murderer. Whether or not that is the correct way of looking at things or not, I'm not sure. I wasn't alive then. I don't know. I can't imagine being in that culture in that time and in that class was very pleasant. So yeah, I'm going to stop here, and the next episode is going to talk about another Masoud Kimiaei movie and the third director I'm going to talk about. But if that worked, if this worked, and if that, my computer worked, I will see you again, I would imagine, pretty soon. I'm trying to get this episode and the next episode out as soon as possible.